Learning objective number 4 is looking at the various types of muscle contraction and the different terms that we use for these various muscle contractions. We will also look at the different muscles in these types of movements. So the focus of the next few slides is a bit of terminology. So to begin with, we aren't actually looking at a particular type of muscle contraction here, but the muscle that is doing the most amount of work in that muscle contraction or action. So for this muscle, we use the term agonist, and the agonist muscle is the muscle that is contracting or shortening during a muscle contraction and is producing the most amount of force. So for example, in a bicep curl, the agonist muscle would be the biceps brachii. The opposite of the agonist is the antagonist. And in the context of a muscle contraction, the antagonist muscle is the muscle that is relaxing or lengthening during a contraction to actually allow that movement to occur. So again, if we think of a bicep curl, the triceps brachii would be the antagonist muscle, because if this muscle doesn't relax or lengthen, the agonist muscle, or the biceps brachii, wouldn't be able to contract. Next, we have the synergist muscle, and this is a muscle that assists the agonist muscle. So it moves the joint in the same direction. It's contracting or shortening, but it's not the prime mover. So it's not doing the bulk of the work or producing the most amount of force. So once more, in a bicep curl, this might be the brachialis muscle, or the muscle that runs alongside or next to the biceps brachii. We then have the term muscle tone, and muscle tone refers to the continuous and partial contraction of a muscle or a group of muscles. So for example, when we were talking about the functions of the muscular system, and we talked about how some of our trunk muscles stabilize the body and hold us in a steady, upright position, this is because our abdominal and our back muscles have muscle tone. In conditions where muscle tone is low, the individual will seem floppy and less stiff or upright than a person with normal muscle tone. We then finally get to our different types of muscle contractions, and our first type of muscle contraction is an isotonic muscle contraction. So this type of muscle contraction occurs when a muscle produces force, either while a muscle is shortening, which we call a concentric isotonic muscle contraction, or while it is lengthening, which we call an eccentric isotonic muscle contraction. So an example of a concentric muscle contraction would again be a bicep curl. So the biceps brachii is producing force while you're lifting that weight up, and the muscle is shortening. This is the most common type of muscle contraction. An example of an eccentric contraction is, let's say, when you do a chin-up and then you slowly lower yourself back down to the ground. You're controlling that movement and producing force or tension in the muscle so that you move back down slowly and don't just fall to the ground. But the muscle is actually lengthening while you are doing this. Now, this type of contraction is said to produce more damage to the muscle because instead of the actin and the myosin heads binding and being pulled towards one another, they're being ripped apart when they're trying to hold on to each other to be able to produce that force or resist the load. Now, this causes additional or more muscle damage than normal, but because of this, it's also thought to produce greater training adaptation. Our last type of muscle contraction is an isometric muscle contraction. So where an isotonic muscle contraction is where a muscle is producing force while the muscle is either lengthening or shortening, an isometric contraction is where the muscle produces force or tension, but the muscle doesn't actually change length. So think about doing a wall squat or a wall sit. where your leg muscles are producing force to hold your body up, but there's no movement. Think about a plank where you're using your muscles, you're creating force or tension to hold that plank position, but there's no movement occurring, so that muscle length is not actually changing shape. So to recap those 3 different types of muscle contractions, we have concentric isotonic muscle contractions, where a muscle shortens while it's producing force. So for the example here, we have the lifting portion of a bicep curl. So your biceps brachii is shortening while producing force. We have an eccentric isotonic muscle contraction, where a muscle lengthens while it's producing force. So in this example here, we have this person slowly lowering the weight in a bicep curl. So the biceps muscle is still producing force to resist the load of the weight, but now it's lengthening while it's doing that. And then we have our isometric muscle contraction, where the muscle produces force to overcome a load, but the muscle doesn't change length at all. So here this person is just holding that weight out at a 90-degree angle. This muscle isn't changing length, but you have to produce force or tension in that muscle to be able to actually hold that weight.